Chapter 3 Mummified Frogs. At dinner, John reaped his reward of $10 from slaying the blackberry bramble in the form of 2 crisp, brand new $5 bills, which he promptly folded over twice and stuck in his pocket, only to dutifully unload them on his nightstand before going to bed. He was surprised how much his arms ached. Not, he figured, from carrying a barrel in his dreams, but from using the garden shears all afternoon on the blackberries. He hoped that the dreams of pirate would fill his night, but alas, he fell promptly into a deep, undisturbed sleep. Morning came, and at first light, a groggy John rolled out of bed and he dressed for the day in shorts and a t-shirt. The shirt was from the Disney's Princess of the Caribbean, and had a print of a skull wearing a pirate's tri-cornered hat. He finished his chores, played a few video games, and browsed his pirate encyclopedia until the decent visiting hour of 9:30, when he wrote on the kitchen whiteboard, "Riding my bike until 10. After Mom's disappearance, John's dad was somewhat paranoid and required John to keep an accurate record of where he was and how long he was going to be there. John did his best to play along for his dad's sake. Once he signed out, he ran outside, jumped on his bike, and pedaled 3 blocks right to the storyteller's house. In one front pocket, he had his 2 $5 bills. In the other pocket, he had the shark skin eye patch. He climbed onto the porch, twice considered turning and running. What if Alyssa's right? What if she really is a kidnapping witch? He shook off the thought, and he found the guts to ring the doorbell. Digital gongs banged out a simple 4-tone melody. John heard pounding footsteps and a bird's craw before the door opened just a crack. The storyteller peeked out at him. Her raven black hair floated around her head like she had been rubbing it with balloons to fill it with static electricity. "I expected you'd be by," she said, opening the door wider. John stuck his hand in his pocket, clutched the money in one hand and the eye patch in the other. "Well, go on, out with it. Why are you here?" The storyteller opened one gray eye wider than the other. "I'm taking on more work," John blurted. He pulled the money from his pocket and showed her 2 folded over $5 bills. "I'll be able to afford that pirate ship if you just put it aside for me." Come in." She stepped back, still holding the door, and motioned for John to enter. He hesitated. This must be when she kidnaps you. Alyssa's voice seemed to be repeating over and over in his head. At first, John considered running, but a single glance to the pirate ship on the fireplace mantel changed his mind. "There's no such thing as witches, there's no such thing as witches," he kept saying to himself. John stepped across the threshold. The door closed behind him. The living room was full of treasures. Next to the door, the peacock hat perched on top of a coat rack. Fronting the window was a golden sofa shaped like a lounging lion. Bookcases were painted different colors like lavender, teal, lime, amber, and cinnamon, sprawling all the way across one wall, each overflowing with books. Not 1, not even 2, but 3 grandfather clocks stood watch, each in a different corner of the room, each set not only to a different hour, but to a different minute as well. But most resplendent and impressive of all was the pirate ship that was in the bottle. "I want to return this," John said, pulling the eye patch from his pocket. "All sales are final." "No, what I really want that ship." He stepped closer and he noticed something he hadn't seen before. There were little men on the deck, one climbing the rigging, even better than he'd remembered it. The ship was $2. "Could be like store credit," he said. "And then I'll add the 10. I'll be at $12 towards the ship." "Did you try the eye patch on?" The storyteller interrupted. "Yes," John nodded. And what? It fits." "Then why would you return it?" John shrugged. The storyteller didn't even blink as she eyed him. He started to feel uncomfortable, realizing he needed to say something. The best he managed was an awkward, "I guess I just don't like it as much as I thought I would." "But the eye patch chose you." Both the storyteller's eyes were open wide. John took a half step away from her, slowly backing towards the door. "I saw you get thin when you put it on." "Thin?" "I could see through you, like you were here and you were there." She reached out, as if remembering the act of grabbing the eye patch from John's head. "The eye patch, it needs you." John looked skeptically at the eye patch in his hand. "Here, let me put on some tea." She turned and walked towards the kitchen. "We have much to discuss." She rose, one hand in the air, shaking her pointed painted finger at the ceiling. John remembered what his dad had said about the storyteller making up outrageous tales just to sell her products at a higher price. All this talk about the eye patch needing him was probably just one of those stories to keep him interested in a worthless piece of shark skin. He turned and put his hand on the doorknob. "No, don't go," the storyteller said from the kitchen. "We still have to discuss the details of your layaway on the pirate ship." John sighed. A layaway deal was exactly what he had come for. He followed the old woman into the kitchen. "Oh, Alyssa better be wrong. She better not be a kidnapping witch," John thought. The fantastic nature of the storyteller's kitchen made the living room seem ordinary. The window facing the backyard was obscured by a floor-to-ceiling maze of potted plants and bird cages. There were canaries, finches, and dozens of other species of fluttering wings as they chirped and sang in the kitchen. Nearly all the cabinet doors had been removed, revealing stacks of jars filled with various twigs, mosses, spices, some pickled vegetables that John recognized, and more pickled vegetables that John didn't recognize. "What is all this?" John asked. "Spices, teas, things I've collected in my travels around the world." The storyteller put a kettle on the cooktop range. "And these?" John pointed at a jar full of mummified frogs. "Those were my pets. I couldn't bring myself to bury them." John stared wide-eyed at the shriveled frogs and hoped the lid was on very, very tight. "Don't worry, my cauldron's in the basement." "Joking. Tell me, what did you see when you put on the eye patch?" "I thought we were going to talk about layaway for the ship." In time. Humor me," she smiled. "I saw a dream, I guess." John stuffed his hands in his pockets. "Dreams? Dragons? Unicorns?" "No." John had grown out of dragons halfway through 4th grade, and unicorns always seemed like a girl thing to him. "Then what? What did you dream of?" "Pirates and an island." John blushed, feeling silly to say it out loud. "It was no dream." The storyteller bent to eye level with John. Her gray eyes stared into his. Yeah, it was feeling... I mean, it felt really real, but it was a dream," John said. "The island, the pirates, the ship, they're real." "I didn't say anything about a ship," John said. "But you saw the ship." Behind her, the kettle whistled, and she turned to the stove. "How could you know that about the ship?" John asked, wondering out loud, starting to believe she might be telling the truth. Then he smacked himself on the forehead. "Of course, duh, pirates always have ships." "Because I got a message in a bottle." She turned back around and took a cup and a saucer in each hand to the table. "Said that the eye patch wanted you." "Me? Your name's John Horngold, isn't it?" She sat and watched John. John hadn't told her his name. "The eye patch wants you, John." For what? The storyteller's colorless gray eyes watched him. She leaned in and whispered like telling a secret. There's someone you need to rescue. John frowned. My neighbor was in the dream, but she called herself Anne. John shook his head, not sure of what to make of all of it. Stop calling it a dream. The storyteller slapped her hand on the table. John jumped at the thundering sound, his heart suddenly beating faster. He edged towards the doorway to the living room. Put on the eye patch, the storyteller urged. See for yourself. John held up the eye patch, watching it spin at the end of the string. Something behind it caught his eye. He squinted. A dozen small round orbs floating in a pickling jar. They looked exactly like eyeballs. John nearly screamed. Melissa's right. She's a witch. I gotta go. Yeah, I gotta go. John turned and ran out of the kitchen. He ran through the living room, and he was out the front door before the storyteller, witch, could even get out of her chair.